Brilliant. So we'll get started. It's 3 minutes past 2 p.m. South Africa time, so we'll just get started. Thank you for joining, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's on the call. There'll be more people joining shortly. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Jankrosh. I'm Director and Head of Africa for Women in Marketing. Women in Marketing is a global network of senior level leaders in marketing, advertising, and communications, and our remit is really to educate, inspire, connect, and recognize women in marketing, advertising, and communications across Africa. I'm getting a bit of feedback. Can anyone, do you hear that feedback, or is it just myself?
Yes, there is a bit of feedback actually when you're speaking.
Let me try and mute everybody, and then that would work. Right. I think that's a little better now, I think. Brilliant. So yes, so that's Women in Marketing.
Andrea, we can't hear you.
Oh goodness. Right. Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't hear. I guess I don't know.
Can you hear me, Belone? Or no? You can hear me. Just say you can hear me, right? Okay. Brilliant. All okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I'll just continue. So Women in Marketing, we started out in 2004 as part of the Chartered Institute of Marketing in the UK, and we've kind of expanded considerably since then with a launch of the Africa Network in 2018 in Durban in South Africa at the Lorries. So just going to say this Real Talk series, I can still hear some feedback. I'm really sorry. I'm not.
I you.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on mute because there's some feedback. Right, can you all hear me? Right, brilliant. Okay, I think that was it. So a huge thank you to the partners who've supported us with this talk. I'm going to explain a bit more about the Real Talk series a little bit later, but it wouldn't have been possible without the support of Unstereotype Alliance and Kantar, which has been amazing. Just to tell you a bit about Unstereotype Alliance, Africa is an ally member of Unstereotype Alliance. They are an organization convened by UN Women, and it's an initiative that seeks to eradicate harmful gender stereotypes in all media and advertising content. It brings together partners and seeks to collectively use the advertising industry as a force for good to drive positive change all over the world. Members of Unstereotype Alliance work towards creating a world without stereotypes, empowering women in all their diversity, whether that be related to race, class, age, ability, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, language, or education, and addressing harmful masculinities to help create a gender equal world. So now on to Real Talk. So this is a discussion that a discussion series that was born out of a few personal conversations with a few women over the course of the COVID pandemic period, starting in 2020. And the discussions were around the impact of the pandemic, with many women experiencing overwhelm and frustration as a result of additional pressures and expectations put on them during lockdown. Some of the difficulties many women with care responsibilities and or who work flexibly have in accessing career enhancing opportunities. And then also the struggle women sometimes have in opening and being open in the workplace and sharing some of the, in sharing with colleagues the daily challenges that they face. So a lot of what women were experiencing at the time was evidenced in global media and research reports, including the UN Women Report on gender equality in the wake of COVID-19. So that's a bit about why these conversations started. What's kind of really special about this conversation is that, one, it's the third in the series for this year, but also in that we're bringing men to the conversation, and that's, you know, a really special. And we've got some amazing kind of marketing leaders on the call with us to share their perspectives on gender equality in the workplace. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to the amazing Bolanle Olukani, apologies, Bolanle, who will be moderating the discussion. And I'm just going to give her a brief intro. She's a TV and radio host, presenter and executive producer of On the Carpet with Bolinto, Future Award winner for on-air personality and documentary filmmaker. Bolanle is a TV host, a radio host, and seasoned compere. She was the host of the acclaimed IT interview show, The Juice, on Nandani TV. Most recently, Bolanle is also the host of the International Women's Month special on Channels TV, the #1 news station in Nigeria. Bolanle has compared and acted as a panel moderator at a variety of conferences, including the International Advertising Association Africa Rising Conference, which was just in October this year. The 2022 Ports of Arms Africa Responds Equity, Delivery and Manufacturing, hosted by the World Bank and Wilton Park. UK Aid DFID Not For Sale launch, the Rebuild Borno Summit in partnership with UNICEF, United Bank of Africa CEO Awards, Social Media Week, Vanguard Personality of the Year Awards, and the 2022 Afro Ball. So very well experienced and seasoned compere and moderator. So Bolanle, I'm going to hand over to you now, and for you to introduce our amazing panelists. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that introduction. So I think there's a shyness when people are reading your life and you're just like, ooh, but you know, you got to take it as it is. Thank you again. It's good to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I think I was immediately drawn to this topic when I met Andrea this year, actually at the IAA conference, and she told me, you know, this conversation that's happening, speaking specifically about the issue of gender equality in the workplace, but we're going to be hearing from the men. And I was like, good, it's time. So I have to say, well done to you guys, Andrea, over there, for especially Women in Marketing Africa, for putting together this conversation. Now, honestly, if you have not told someone about this conversation we're going to have, please go ahead, you know, send the link to your friends, put it on your Twitter, repost it on your LinkedIn, because we do have a panel that is going to truly give us some really good insights on what gender equality can look like and how we can really push this conversation forward when it comes to the workplace. Our panelists are individuals who are extremely well accomplished in their fields. And I'm going to be starting off with Dr. Mazamo Masito, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Google Africa. He is wearing the coolest bucket hat right now, and I'm going to ask for him to send it to me once we're done. Dr. Mazamo Masito is a seasoned executive and currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Google Africa. Prior to joining Google, he held the position of CMO and Managing Executive for Vodacom Africa Group, a JSC listed company. Dr. Mazamo Masito considers himself a Pan-Africanist and is extremely passionate about making sure that Africa is represented in a way that is our story. So please welcome our first panelist, Dr. Mazamo Masito. And I know you go by Zamo. Should we call you Doc? Which one, you know, what? Any of them?
WiM is fine.
All right. Our next panelist is someone who is very, very passionate about the work he does. He is a marketing executive and has truly done amazing work when it comes to leading iconic brands. Nathan Palmer is the business lead, Unilever Home Care SA. He's entrenched and loved by so many South Africans. Hey, I'm an honorary South African. You know, I go there every year, so I completely agree. Unilever Brands has played a pivotal role in his upbringing. Thus, he considered it a privilege to join Unilever in 2006 through the graduate recruitment program. Since joining the company, Nathan has worked across Southern Africa, Central Africa, and has held a global digital role in London for several years, driving and developing partnerships with Facebook, Google, and Spotify. Please help me welcome the business lead for Unilever Home Care, Nathan Palmer. Hello, Nathan. Good to have you here with us. And our last panelist, CEO, Kantar Insights Division, Ivan Moroke. Ivan is the CEO of Kantar Insights Division for South Africa, a seasoned marketing practitioner and deeply seasoned. He's driven by mining for insights from diverse sources, which are then used to develop and differentiate actionable marketing and communication strategies for delivering profitable growth. His key expertise in insight and strategic marketing has been honed by a career that formerly started at British American Tobacco. Working across the entire marketing value chain, this was followed by an introduction to consulting at Added Value, and where he now works on various strategic marketing projects for a list of blue chip companies across industries. Please help me welcome the CEO of Kantar Insights Division, Mr. Ivan Moroke. It's so good to see you, Ivan. All right, so I'm going to jump right into this conversation because I know that we will want to make sure that we get as much time specifically so that we can talk to our panelists. And also we want to make sure that we get opportunities to ask all of our people who are attending to also join in and send in their questions. So I think I'm going to start a little bit. I'm going to start with you, Zamo. I want to find out, when it comes to the conversation of gender equality, in the workplace, can you just tell us a little bit about what it is that you've done to kind of contribute to this conversation in the course of, the work that you do?
Good day, everyone, or good afternoon. I would say like most of the work is actually more me, actually, than what do you do for others. In this case is what do I do because my ignorance is infinite in this space, and also it would be very hard for me to pretend that I was not raised in a culture where actually it favors men or being a man. So there are certain biases I hold, or prejudices actually that I hold, that I've actually had to do a lot of work. Even though I was raised by 8 sisters and a mother, I have 3 daughters. So I actually grew up in predominantly just women households. And my mother has 5 sisters. So it's just women, but I had to do a lot of, for me, I would say the first thing is just self-work and just reducing ignorance, and also just being a lot more conscious and aware when I do say stupid things, or I do stupid things, which sometimes are not intentional. And sometimes it looks like they are intentional. And so that's for me the part. It's just a lot of work. And now I have 3 daughters, 20 and 18-year-old, who consider themselves woke. And their job is to correct me, educate me, cancel me sometimes. Even in my own home, I get cancelled. So that, for me, it's the internal work. And because I once read something that says prejudice is a long-term emotional commitment to ignorance, and that the higher the ignorance, the higher the prejudice. And this cuts across race, gender, sexual orientation, persons with disability. I'm just working on the ignorance. And the less ignorance I have, then the less I fear. Same with women, the better supporter I could be. So it's not actually women's job to educate men. I think it's actually men's job to educate themselves. And then, of course, great women allies, if they so want, to also add in the education. But I must be a willing student. So I'm just being a willing student.
I mean, thank you for that. I think that really sets up this conversation in a direction that is good, because I want to go over to you, Nathan, and I want to find out from you, when it comes to D&I and this gender equality conversation that is really finally beginning to take off globally and being put at the forefront of a lot of conversations about how do we make sure the workplace is good for women. Why is this important to you?
Yeah, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to you. Yeah, it's a great question. I think similar to what Mzamo said. I think I grew up in a different culture to Mzamo, but the similar dynamics existed in many ways. And I think, one of the things where I think we all need to front into is that when it comes to any issue that you're looking at, whether it's this issue or another, it starts with the person themselves and your worldview. For what lens do you view the world? And I think I can speak personally, not in the capacity as a Unilever, but from a personal perspective, I grew up in a very strong religious home, and I'm a firm believer that we're all created equal in the eyes of God. And if that's your starting point, it's not just about equality, but about ensuring that everyone is supported and encouraged in the choices that they make. You cannot hold prejudices. Of course, to Mzamo's point, that's an ebb and flow. It's a lifelong battle because I haven't got that right. But for me, it starts from a worldview, and it starts from a belief that we are equal in the eyes of God, and therefore play very important roles in societies as man and female. And equally so, depending on whatever route you choose to be, you should be supported in that. And so when you see prejudices or these things outworking themselves, be it at home or in the workplace, that's an ethical and moral issue, not just a practical issue. So I think that would probably summarize where my viewpoint comes from. Could I add to that as well? I don't want to take the whole conversation. But another thing which I've also seen, this is more the practical outworking, is we did a study across Africa in terms of disposable income. And I remember we went across, I think it was about 32 African countries, including South Africa. And what was interesting is that the survey looked at what do people do with their disposable income based on gender. And we found that it's interesting that something like as high as 82% of disposable income of women was spent on their children and their communities. When you looked at men, it was inverse, 80% on themselves and probably a small portion on family. And so apart from the ethical issue, there's a practical element of of what women do to support society and our nation and our continent. So I found that quite telling as well. But yeah, just some thoughts.
Wow, that's a really, I'm shocked by that statistics, honestly. Just thinking about the continent and thinking about how there's this constant narrative that men are the breadwinners, but in reality, they might be making the money, but it sounds as if they're not spending the bread where they're supposed to be spending the bread. So that's very, very shocking statistic. All right, Ivan, I want to go to you, and I want to hear your thoughts specifically on gender equality. And when you hear this conversation being brought up over and over again, and we're really trying to understand how do we marry the two, and what does that look like in the workplace? What does that look like to you? You're still muted, Ivan.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm going to reference something that both Mzamo and Nathan said. Starting off with what Nathan said about belief. I think when he was saying his thoughts, there's something about belief. Before inclusion and diversity, you have to have a fundamental belief in business. That, the common cliche that homogeneous groups can get to a solution faster, but diverse group can get to a better solution. You have to fundamentally believe that. Because without believing it, even your best R&D strategies, they are not going to be optimal. Okay. So it is about that belief to say, if you are diverse, you will deliver better. So even if you don't look at it from an ethical perspective, well, you can look at it from something that talks to everybody. It's a commercial perspective. It's logical. So, of course, your hope is both logical. It's both commercial and also personal, ethical as well. But business is business. And there's always this tension to say, can we have one without the other? There's no question that you have to diverse. And what women will bring in a male-dominated industry. I think it goes without saying. They just produce far much more better results. So I could not understand why, from a commercial reason, why somebody would not improve that. It defies logic. And I think we might touch on it as we are speaking about what drives you. And I think I reference back to what Mzamo was saying. Mzamo was mentioning how his kids are woke. I think the problem is when you think as a man you are woke. For me, there's the bigger problem, right? Like Mzamo, I've been raised, my life has been influenced by women. I've got 2 daughters, so I live with 3 men in the house. And the worst mistake I can ever do is to think, I got it. I got it because I'm woke, I'm empathetic. And when there is an issue, it's like, yeah, but I got it. I'm not that kind of man, I've got it. That's the worst thing that you can do. Actually, I think it might be better to be sexist than being woke sometimes.
It's really interesting that you say that. And honestly, when I hear it, I'm really curious as to how this thought became, how it really was embedded in your mind. The reason why I say that is because there are constant conversations of what does it look like to be an ally. And the question is, for you, Ivan, I'm curious, what does that look like to be an ally on this issue?
It's simple. And most of the answers to these issues are quite simple. And sometimes they sound like cliche. Listen not to validate your opinions. Listen to understand. This applies to all aspects of life, right? But we have a human condition of listening to answer or to validate our opinions. And Mzamo said it about the eternal learner. And I think there was something about ignorance. You have to fundamentally realize you will never, ever get it 100%. Not because you are not woke or empathetic, because you are not a woman. I think if we can start thinking about that, to say a lived experience of a man will never, ever be the same as a lived experience of a woman. So if you cannot do that, it's going to be a perpetual learning thing, because you don't know on a daily basis, whether in personal or in the company, what women go through. You might be the most empathetic person, but you will never get it. And if you embrace that, it liberates you as well as a man.
I'm going to come back to you, Ivan, and we're going to talk, because I also want to make sure that we leave with actual strategies of how to make sure that there are a lot of individuals who don't have the mindsets that any of our panelists, and it's questions how do we encourage them to become allies. But Zama, I want to go to you and talk a little bit about traditional masculinity, and specifically as Africans, we're all Africans, or at least our panel, in terms of the panel, and I know the role that the idea of gender roles within the context of Africa and our societies, and how it plays out in the possible workplace. So can you talk to us a little about how you've seen, traditional masculinity play out in the workplace, and how we can kind of separate that two different agencies?
It's a difficult one, because there's intersectionality in gender, which then if you add religion, tribes, which in this continent we don't always want to talk about, but actually I have found religion, tribalism plays a huge role in influencing how we even manage this intersectionality gender. That's the other part. Like, it's just, it either complicates it or it makes it even more complex. So that's the first part for me. Is just, that's what has been interesting to me, that everywhere I travel in the continent, and I've traveled to like 48 plus of these countries, I still see the dimension of religion and tribe play its role even within gender. The second part is men are not a homogeneous group.
Yeah.
So even within men, we are not homogeneous. So even within men, some are ultra right, some are ultra left, some are moderate. And so the suggestion that all of masculinity and patriarchy is toxic is kind of defeating to the ones who are trying harder to be fair and promote equality. So the third part as well is, even within women in the workplace, women are not a homogeneous group. There are women even within the workplace who still are pro traditional male roles, just as much as there are women who are pro progressive modern male roles. And I sometimes feel like the left seems to dominate the conversation so much that as if they aren't moderates or they aren't right wing gender like people, men and women. So that's how I've been struggling actually in the workplace. Then the third one, how it shows up in the workplace. Now I feel like it shows up as self-censorship. No one wants to say anything. Like everyone's just shit scared. Like just shit scared to say anything. Because now if I see your hair and I say something about your hair, I might get into trouble. So, but at the same time, what it also shows from a male is sometimes men will feel like it feels unfair or not balanced, because it feels like sometimes women can say things about men. Oh, you don't look great today. Oh, but if the reverse happens, then you're in dipshit. So it's just, so I must say, at the moment, I feel like people are walking on eggshells around this issue of gender, race, sexual orientation, persons with disability. And then you add the intersectionality. If the woman also identifies as LGBTQ, or she's a person with disability or neurodiversity, it's even more complex and sensitive. So, and then everyone is kind of just trying to walk on eggs. And then what I found happens a lot is that women end up receiving more not actionable, useful feedback in the workplace. Partly not because sometimes men intentionally want to do so, but I think sometimes people are just trying so hard to be politically correct, and they're trying so hard to be not seen as chauvinistic or right-wing males and all of that. So I must say, I find it's complicated and complex.
And I'm happy that you were very honest about it, because it's true. I was having a conversation with a friend, funny enough, in preparation for this, and he literally said the exact same thing, that at his company, there was the HR, he works in HR, and he dresses very nice, and they always tell him, the woman, they're like, oh, you look nice, you look like a GQ model. And one day he said to him, he was like, I can actually never compliment you on what you look like anymore. And they looked at him and they were like, huh. And I think it's that question of, okay, it's like a constant tug of war of understanding, what does this look like when it comes to safety in the workplace, issues of harassment, sexual harassment, where do we draw the lines? Where is too far is too far? Where is, oh, I'm just a human being being a human being telling you look nice, right? This constant, and it's going to take some time. So thank you for bringing that up. Nathan, I want to go to you. Oh, exactly. I think you raised your hand. Okay.
Yeah,
I want to go to you, and I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Do you mind if I comment on what Ms. Mzamo said? I think part of the issue, I think he mentioned it probably in a similar vein, which I'm going to say, but I think also the platforms for conversation have been destroyed. So there's no, if you look at kind of go back in days gone by, there may be some level of debate where you'd bring alternative, even conflictory views, and that debate could play out in an organized manner. And the people, you could separate the person from the idea. And I think in modern culture, and we've seen it all over the world, if you have a divergent view to what popular culture dictates, you may never recover from it, ever. You can be stripped of your sponsorships. You could be stripped of your voice on social media. You could be even officially struck off Twitter in a formal way. For example, I hate to mention Twitter, sorry, Mzamo, but you know what I mean. And I think as soon as you destroy the ability for people to converse with divergent ideas, society regresses. It doesn't progress, it regresses. And the problem is, I think it's not as simple as just creating platforms. I think the problem is that how do you do that in a responsible way, respecting people's rights and different views, and and particularly not just, I agree with Mzamo. It seems kind of the left viewpoint has dominated popular culture. And if you have any right tendency, you'll be punished for it. But I think in the middle of it is the moderate, where probably the majority of people sit, and they don't even get a voice on this. So I echo exactly what Mzamo was saying. And I asked, I won't say if it's our current CEO or a former CEO, how do you even set a corporate culture that allows for that? Because how do you even do a kind of a poll of your employees in terms of where they stand? Or do you just inherit something if you work for a global organization, which most of us do, where you say, well, this is our culture and this is what we stand for? It's a very, very tricky thing. I don't know if I have the answer for it either. So I just wanted to echo what Mzamo was saying.
Ivan, it looks like you have lots of thoughts that you want to offload. I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I also have a question for you in regards to, we've kind of talked about how we're not sure if the conversation is actually communicating, right? And that's what the real question is. The conversation on gender equality in the workplace, specifically from the male perspective, are we communicating? Do you feel like we're communicating effectively? That's my question to you.
Yeah, there was nothing more to add from what Nathan and Mzamo said. I mean, I fully agree with them. It's just that I'm quite understanding, I think, of how things have shifted to the left. Is not completely right, but I can understand why there is, right? So it's not perfect. None of the approaches are perfect, but why that, even if it comes at the risk of maybe not embracing divergent views, I think in terms of where things are, maybe we had to do that, to give other voices that were being suppressed. But in doing that, of course, there are consequences to that. So I understand it's not perfect, but why it went there. In terms of communicating, if you mean in terms of how companies are communicating about their views on gender equality, that's what you're asking, that how do companies?
Well, that, and also more of the narrative, the way when we're talking about how we, for example, I would say, for example, this conversation is rare to have where you're talking about gender equality and it's all men on it, right? I always say that sometimes it feels like women are speaking to women. So I want to see in this conversation of gender equality that's happening globally, do you feel like it's communicating effectively to men?
No, it's not. I think in terms of that is right. Like even about the idea of this panel being all male is brilliant, right? Because whatever discrimination you are thinking about, whether from ethnicity, religion, or even gender, it doesn't help that women are having a conversation and they end up just seems like it's a conversation of lamenting about how bad things are. That doesn't help anyone, right? It goes back to the people who might have the power to influence, to hear. And I think many of the times when I agree with the guys is in trying to get this conversation going, it is not just what we are doing, but for us to be vulnerable to say our fears, right? I mean, that's an important thing because it's not just like taking out a stick. And that's why in our pre-conversation before to say, guys, it's about getting some tangible stuff. It's not about taking out a stick to say, you men have been bad. So we acknowledge it, but I think it's quite important for us to also have a space where we can be vulnerable. Someone said before, when he said in the introduction to say sometimes, and I responded today to say being a sexist, actually, it's not better, but it's better to deal with because it's defined. I can see it. The worst thing is unconscious bias. That is deep because it's insidious, right? So between unconscious bias and people who mean well and do their own things, that's quite difficult because what you don't want to do is to kill their spirit, especially if somebody means well and then they put their foot wrong. But it's really been able to give the people the space. I mean, even when they've done wrong or good intentions going bad, to absolutely collaborate and have them the space to say, where did I do wrong and how can I improve on it? And it goes back to the earlier point that I'm saying, but it takes self-awareness of a male to say, and I saw there was a comment to say, is it right to say we can never get it? I think what I meant was we can never get it enough to fully understand the lived experience of a woman. I cannot overemphasize that enough, right? So regardless of how smart, how open you are not a woman. There are things, I mean, like, as I said, I have a family of women on a daily basis. They might not even be telling me some of the daily stuff that they experience, whether it's at work or you're in a supermarket and wolf whistling somebody. They might not even be bothering to tell me. But when they do, it's for me to listen and not to be like, oh, I get it. I'm not like that toxic masculinity. I get what's going down. No, you cannot get it to the extent of being a woman. So it comes down to really listening and listening to understand and having the conversation with our main folk, which is something that I think you're going to ask to say, what do we do as men with other men, not only in relation to women? Bingo, you're on mute.
You just pulled one on me. Thank you for that, Ivan. No, I was saying thank you for that. You know, I think we're kind of cracking at this mountain a little bit. I'm just chipping away at it. Zamo, I'm going to go over to you. I know you want to share some thoughts on this.
The thought I wanted to share was that when you're talking about communication, is that as a Black male, where there's something common between me and mostly women, Black women, is that we're both Black. So there is a struggle on race that we share something in common with. Well, that one seems easier to communicate because that is both affects us, and we travel the world while being Black, and so we know how it feels like to be discriminated being Black. Now, the difficulty on the gender one is that sometimes when I speak to males in hidden corners, so that males who things they won't say in public, it will be, you know what? If I'm in the US, I'm a Black male, or if I'm in South Africa, actually, in the continent, the statistics on suicide, completed suicide, is 4-1 is men. Incarceration, 90% men. 90% of people who die from violent deaths is men. And then, but males then start to feel like the narrative suggests that a dying man is not news, but a dying woman is lots of news. So then it kind of becomes it feels like the way the communication is going, it's not balanced in that there's pain on both sides. And there's still pain on both sides. It doesn't, when you shine a light on women's pain, it doesn't mean we should ignore the light on male pain. But it feels like male starts to feel like their pain is meaningless or has no worth or value. The only thing that matters now is redress for women at the expense of male pain. But no one would say that publicly, because even me saying it, I start to feel like shit, I might get cancelled just saying it. So that's I think where the communication imbalance is sometimes, is that when we talk, it's no different, by the way, when we talk about race. Sometimes I've had white colleagues who would say to me, sometimes it makes them feel like it's black. I'm talking about South Africa now, like, or US, black, and that if you're white, you just need to park in some corner and you had your 10. Now it's not your time anymore. And whatever you say, you might get into trouble as a white person. And it's I think it's similar even here as men. Like, it's the way we're communicating redress, equality, for me, it's still imbalanced and dangerous.
Okay, so this is very, very good feedback. And I think, you know, that really is the question, because I always say that if we're communicating, the question is, to the people that we're communicating, do they understand us? that's always been a bit of my challenge on this gender equality conversation that's happening right now. And I also have some other thoughts on it, but I want to go over to you, Ivan, and then I'm going to come over to you, Nathan, because I also want to hear your thoughts on this specifically, because, when I think about the different kind of generational shifts, there is obviously that in terms of the panel. So I want to hear your thoughts on that as well. Over to you, Ivan.
No, just a quick one on what Mzamo was saying. I was listening to the radio recently, and something happened in South Africa where this woman, I think, killed 4 of her kids. And a caller called on the radio, and he was quite upset, right? He said, it's quite interesting. Every time you talk about this kind of cases, you immediately go into mental health with women. But when a man does it, there's no reference to mental health. And it was amazing how the radio host, he dismissed it and just, I'm not going to entertain it, we are moving on. I mean, it's exactly that kind of example where you are minimizing the male pain. And sometimes when you do that unintentionally, you bring just such negative and antagonizing attitudes to males because of just say, it seems like whatever we are feeling can be minimized. So it was just something else Mzamo was saying that brought that conversation to mind.
So I think, Ivan, you have literally kicked us off into my next question, which I'm going to take to you, Nathan. And when it comes to passive or even active resistance by men to gender equality, do you think it's more perceived, or is it actually happening? Do you think that a lot of men are kind of just like, well, okay. And do you think it could be a cause of this lack of communication that's happening on the conversation of gender equality?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And to use the technique that Mzamo's used, it's going to be different everywhere. I think it's not going to be one homogenous kind of situation. I think what I can talk to is my experiences in terms of places where I've worked and how that's played out. I think in some cases I've seen a very almost intentional way of ensuring homogeneity. So, for example, recruiting certain people based on the fact that they'll likely fit in with a certain business unit or company, so that they can perpetuate the culture that they've had. An example of that would be, I remember this company I was engaged with for some time. They would have, for example, golf days. Every Friday, they all play golf together, and they'd watch a certain rugby team on a Thursday. Or there would be a club kind of element to it. And I imagine in that case, there was an assertive kind of really defined intention to ensure that would perpetuate. And there would be and if you did, and there were some women who were in that company, but they were forced to give up their natural demeanors and interests to conform, to have any likelihood of getting anywhere in that company. Now, that's one example. So to answer your question, it certainly is around and certainly is playing out intentionally in certain contexts. At the same time, if I talk about Unilever for a moment, and we're talking about just before the call started, in my team of, how many are in my team? Maybe 35 people. There are 3 men. The rest are women. Now, it's interesting in that context. I have not just, you could argue, well, what level of organization are they? Are you like the white male at the top of the pile, the cappuccino? And what's interesting is I think where Unilever's got it right is that they've got senior, accomplished, experienced female leaders all the way to the top. And so it's a case of there isn't this distinctive homogenous piece where everyone has to conform. The top already represents a fairly diverse, of course, it's not perfect. There's still work to be done, a lot, particularly in the racial side. But in terms of what it looks like at a leadership level, there's no need to conform because there are lots of different variables at that level. Another example I'd give you is I remember doing some development work through the church I was involved in, Khayelitsha, and in Cape Town. And I remember the guys they took cricket bats and they're doing different sporting codes and that football, etc. I remember that everyone gravitated towards football. It's obviously just what people love to play. And the question was, why is no one interested in cricket? And the guys would say, well, I've never seen anyone like me represented at a national level or at any level of accolade. This was back in the 80s, right? And so you need people to see others like them in those levels, to be able to feel that they can be part of that. If they don't, they'll conform into what they believe that needs to be to actually get into those positions. So yeah, I think to answer your question, there's some pockets where it's very much alive. There are other elements where I think there's been some good work and continues to be good work, but still it's like we're saying, we're ignorant and there's a long way to go. So yeah, hope that helps.
No, thank you for that, Nathan. And, you know, again, remember the conversations when we're talking about it in the workplace. I know we're running out of time. I feel like we're just starting to chip away at this conversation. We have a few more minutes. And I want to take some of the questions that have been put in the chat. And specifically, let's really hone in on, okay, how do we move forward in the workplace? What does that look like? So question from, I'm sorry in terms of pronunciation, but Kangilani. She says, the person says, how do we begin to address the sensitivities around the issues of gender and diversity in the workplace, particularly relating to women and queer bodies? Because while they are valid, they should not inhibit us from championing the change and challenging the status quo. And then the second question is, what is the role of male brand leaders as a whole in achieving this? Because it cannot be the responsibility of the select few on this call. I don't know if anyone wants to take that question. Okay, Zamo, please, over to you.
Let me start with the one on the role of male brand leaders. Like the first part, of course, is the person who's going to lead must also educate themselves so that they walk the talk. They're going to make loads of mistakes, but they must at least do the work. That's the first one. Then the second one, once you've done the work, what I've noticed in my case, when you do the work, then the second one is being actively alert in meetings. Like, for example, when I'm in meetings now, I know that 9 out of 10 women will be the ones who want to take minutes. And guys don't. And that now needs to end. The second one, women will volunteer to want to make tea or coffee. Men never do those things. That also needs to end. The third one, women are more likely to be asked to do non-promotable work. Let's organize a year-end party. 9 out of 10, a woman will volunteer. And all this stuff has nothing to do with getting promoted. And it's just being nice. And the chances of you getting promoted doing that stuff are close to zero. But it tends to always over-index on as if it's a woman's responsibility. The fourth one is when we hire. If we are looking for making sure we're diverse, then let's make sure that the panel, even the panel that is interviewing, is it diverse enough? The second thing, the people we are interviewing, are they diverse enough? For example, mathematically, if I'm looking for a woman, at least let me make sure if I have 10 candidates, 6 out of 10 of those candidates I'm interviewing are women. It increases the chances of me finding a woman. But if I make it 2 out of 10 are women, what are the chances of me not hiring a man? So those are some of the deliberate, intentional. And then the other one I've learned here at Google is helping underrepresented groups self-promote. I know that when I do self-evaluations, men self-promote more than women. Men give themselves higher ratings more than women. And my job is to be consciously aware that I know that when I sit with a woman leader or even future leader, she's more likely going to be more humble on her rating and she will score herself lower when she deserves to score. Or she's more likely not going to self-promote when she should self-promote. Whereas guys have found like they don't even need a warm-up to self-promote or self-evaluate themselves higher. So I would say those are some of like practical, everyday things that we could be consciously doing as brand leaders in making sure that, and then the last one is just own up when we've made a mistake and not try hide it and just own up and then show what we've learned from it and what we're going to do better or differently.
Thank you very much, Zamu, for those. Those were very practical, very good examples as well. Nathan, I'm going to come over to you. You know, you talked about how you have a team where it's predominantly women, you know. Just talk to us a little bit about like your day-to-day experiences of ways that you feel like brand leaders can really ensure that they're making gender equality conversation in the workplace and it's being effective.
Yeah, great. I think, yeah, in my case, this is going to sound counter to what we're talking about today, is we actually have too many women, if I'm honest. So again, if we go back to the principle that we're talking about, diversity is the key for success. And I think you can often over-egg it. In our case, I don't know how if I'm honest, asking the question, how do we get there? I don't actually know, to be honest, but it's actually across all the marketing functions, that is pretty much the same story. So I guess I'll stick to the principle of one, it's the diversity is what we're after, not necessarily an overrepresentation of any other group or gender or race. What I would say though is one of the things that's been pivotal, I think, in creating that, or part of how we got there, is I think at least Unilever's gone out of its way in terms of understanding some of the pain points that women have in the working world. So I think, similar to what Mzamo was saying, in terms of there might be certain nuances or traits that play themselves out more predominantly in women than men. I think there's certain life kind of pinch points or pain points that women tend to deal with that need to be rectified as well. So one of them would be, and this is obviously going back to the traditional role conversation, women are more likely to bear the burden of kids. In terms of, it's in some cases that's got better. You know, in some cases you get the 50-50s, but that's more the exception than the norm. So how do you encourage or create an environment where women can succeed with knowing the burdens or traditional burdens that a lot of them carry? I'm not going to debate whether it's right or wrong, but it is what it is. And how do you deal with that? I think a second one would be, I think Mzamo touched on it in terms of the self-promotion element. The understatedness of women in terms of evaluations and the way that they arrive in terms of evaluation is another big piece that we've had to play out. I think the other one would be the nature of, this is something that we've kind of inherited, but a voice in the workplace. So men are also not just kind of less agreeable, but they're more likely to be outspoken and quite confrontational in terms of a general trait seen, globally. So again, how do you create an environment where every voice is heard? Actually, surprisingly, during COVID, COVID has helped us in some ways by nature of examples like this. A Teams meeting where hands are put up and there's an order assigned to them has been revolutionary for people having a voice. Because usually you'd be around a board table, whoever waited the kind of the shortest amount of time after the last sentence of the previous person and just butted in would get their voice heard. So I think understanding some of those pain points and leaning into them directly can revolutionize the workspace for women and give them a framework in which to succeed. So I think those are some of the things that we can talk to. And I mentioned earlier in the previous question, I think role models at senior levels are essential, absolutely essential. If you don't see people like you represented higher up, you're never going to kind of live out your true self. You're going to conform or bend yourself to a perspective that's not yours. So I think some of those things are what all leaders should be looking to do.
Thank you, Nathan. And I think the one that really stood out for me is really talking a lot about, it's interesting, you never thought about what does diversity and inclusion look like and how do you continue to maintain that? But that's an interesting thought. When you said that there's so many women and there are too many women. And I'm like, how's that possible? There can never be too many women. Ayman, you have had a really extensive career in marketing, and the role of marketing in the world is so powerful because marketers are the ones that really tell the world what to think in many ways, right? And really drive conversations. Why is D&I so important when it comes to the marketing sector and really making sure that we hit this right?
It makes commercial sense. I think it says, if you look at demographics, and if you look at all sectors, generally speaking, in terms of the female market, if I have to just forget, and you might have picked up that sometimes I choose not to focus on the ethics and the morality of it, because in this business, men think every time when we speak, it's like always about the commercials, but it makes business sense. If you are selling to a market with such influence, the influence of women on society, and I think was it Nathan who was saying, like, it's been proven that if women has got a cash and how she uses that. So it's just logic. Why won't you, if your market is so influenced by women, You'll be ridiculous to try to think you'll be in a position to know exactly what they think, how they feel, things that are deep nuance, especially in marketing, it's about nuances and about insights. Why wouldn't you do that? It just makes commercial sense to be doing that. Fortunately, just to add on that, like Nathan, I'm fortunate in the business that I'm in. It's actually lots of women, right? We don't have an issue with gender, but not only lots of women from across the entire business. And the advantage of having different types of women, so a whole lot of women, but different types, to Mzamo's point, they are not a homogeneous group. So I'm fortunate and I'm privileged because I can see there are differences. So lots of women, but all of them, I mean, are so different from each other. So I'm so privileged. I don't even have to be preached about the importance of women and how different they are not heterogeneous group. I see it every day. And there's some that irritates me just as much as men, as much as there are some who inspire me as much as men. So I am in my role, I think, because somebody was asking the question, how do we escape? For people like me and Nathan who are so privileged, it comes down to in our safe spaces as men. And it's not easy. Am I willing in my own way without coming across to say, man, come on, man, you are not living up to the brotherhood, but to educate and to share, because I still don't want to lose my mates and my friends, right? So it's not like I want to be on a soapbox to say, okay, brothers, let's get together. I'm going to preach you about how to treat the women folks. I don't do that, but I think it is your personal responsibility. And especially for people like us who got daughters, because if we don't do that with those other men and who can be teaching their sons, their problem with their sons is going to be my problem in the end anyway. So anyway, I think the gist of the matter is exact to say in your own small spaces, I think it is not right to keep quiet while you see like the bad jokes and all that. I mean, we are all for all those kind of stuff, but it's like you and nobody can dictate that to you. There's something that's personally, and you as a man, you must choose a lane. Are you going to be part of the problem or are you going to perpetuate it by even keeping silent?
So the soapbox, and again, I think we have to also remember that in life there's a diversity of people, so there's also a diversity of ways to communicate this as well.
Yeah,
and I think that's something that over time we're probably going to begin to really understand. We're going to take another question from the chat, and it says, women expect men to step up and be allies as we strive for equity in the workplace, but how can we turn the tables and ensure you all have the support you need to thrive and not feel sidelined? Zama, I'm going to throw that question over to you.
So this one is it's a difficult one in the sense that there is a genuine case that women have it hard, especially in all the data I've looked at in the companies I've worked in. Black women in particular have it harder. So women have it hard, but the data I've seen, Black women have it the hardest, or persons of color. Women or persons of color just have it the hardest. And so I'm kind of saying to myself, I do feel like there has to be support for men who are willing to be advocates for freedom for all, equality for all, or equity for all. Yet, at the same time, I also don't want my fragilities to be nursed by women. So women don't have to nurse my fragility, because I also have my own masculinity fragilities that I'm working on. So that part, so the part I want at work for most is more training, more cover, like knowing that I can make a mistake and it will not be like final written warning, or unless of course I'm an asshole or I've done something really, really unethical, violates a woman or whatever. But if I make these mistakes, I must know there's a place for me to make a mistake and learn from it and grow from it. But currently, it's hard. It's like if you make a mistake, you're out. And that's the part that we need to deal with, is the safety. It's more psychological safety for all, not just for women, but for men who are trying to get into the bus or to advocate for equity and freedom for all.
Yeah, and just to add, if you look at the spectrum from all discrimination, I mean, for gender, they range from sexist to unconscious bias to anything in between. Surely you cannot treat, if you can identify where on the scale a person is, cannot use the same skit as a blatant sexist, just like a blatant racist, right? Cannot be the same, I mean, the remedy that you do as compared to unconscious bias or a misguided, so unconscious bias or a misguided activist. And I think it's right, Mzamo, in terms of like, we were talking about diversity. So even I think the solutions to those different people, there has to be diverse solutions. But and the last thing you can do is to get people to retract because of not wanting, where we started off, of not wanting to make a mistake. That is such a lost opportunity. I'd rather deal with somebody who's willing and is getting it wrong, unlike somebody who's completely closed the door, because I don't want to turn somebody who is willing into an anti because of how they've been treated like. So we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, turning them into an anti, because then you're drawing a line and you're saying it's us versus you. Whereas I think there needs to be a different type of conversation. Nathan, I want to hear your thoughts on this. You know, what ways do you think women can provide more support to assist men in being allies? Should women be providing men more support to be to assist them to be allies?
Yeah, I think again, we've made this point a few times. It's not going to be the same everywhere, but I do think we've got to start from a position that men are not chauvinists until proven otherwise. So I think you can't start from a position that men are inherently in the evil space and therefore need to be kind of educated to a point where they're enlightened and then can engage and help women. I think that's a big danger to start with. What I do think is that, you know, in this kind of journey, there needs to be a kind of understanding that we're all inherently flawed beings. And Zama made that point earlier. We're on a journey of trying to understand ourselves first and try to make ourselves better. And I think when you start from that, that's a disarming position to start from. Then I think people can really partner together in terms of making a better future. So, for example, going back to your question, you know, what can women do? Can they help men to be better allies, or can men be? You know, I think it has to start with a common vision that we're not there yet, and we can get there. But I'm not the evil. I'm not evil inherently. I'm not the one who's brought this upon you. In some cases, Mzama's point earlier as well, there are some of those, but I think if you can get to a position of trust where we believe that we can make a better future and a better environment, or a better corporate culture for that matter, that's a starting point. Thereafter, I think, also echoing what was said, I think, by Ivan, is that, you know, you're going to make mistakes along the way, and how do you kind of engage with those mistakes? Some of them will be blatant, some of them will be more minor, but do you kind of, I don't know, create the space for those mistakes to be made and for people to forgive and move on under the guise of development. So I think, again, the difficulty I've got is it's the environment that I'm currently in. I see a lot of positivity in this space, mentoring. I see representation. I see forums. I see also that you mentioned the Unstereotype Alliance. There's a whole forums that are put in place. I think the next step for me would be moving away from forums to it just being part of our inherent culture. I think that's probably the next step I'd love to see, without it having to be, this is a meeting we're going to talk about. It's just going to be kind of part of who we are. But yeah, so it's a lot of talking. I think Mzama's got his hand up.
And I was thinking, oh, I hope this thing doesn't get me into trouble. I'm always thinking trouble. The thing I wanted to say was that you're saying, what can women do? But also I feel like I've been thinking about it as a Black person, that there have been instances where I judge others, which is white or not Black, on their actions, but I judge myself on my intentions. And I also assume more sometimes that it's because I'm black. And sometimes it has nothing to do with me being black. It's just I suck at something at that point. And I think also the same should apply to women as well. There are instances where it has nothing to do with the fact that you're a woman. It's just maybe you suck as well, like I do sometimes. So I think we also need to, as much as we other a lot, we also have to turn, and as like the scripture says, one, you pointing at someone, but three fingers are pointing at you, or a speck and wood in your eye. There also has to be a lot of work that we are also need to do as individuals, because we have agency to figure out how do we score own goals as well. Not only externalize this to the other. Yes, are men having work to do? Yes, but do also women themselves have work to do? Yes, they also do have work to do. And also 99% of other women discriminate other women. So also women have work to do. So I feel like there has to be like a balance, like, yes, men have to do the work, but I also feel like each individual or person also needs to also torture their own souls to confess the truth about them. That not everything at work is about your gender or race or disability or sexual orientation. Sometimes it's just you are incompetent and you need to up your game.
So, if I made 2 points quite quickly, which I found funny, was the beauty about diversity, though, and even having diversity as leadership. When somebody is not performing, a person who looks like them, whether from a race or from a gender perspective, we can call that out, right, Mzamo? That's a bit easier, because in a sensitive world, white manager might say, oh, there is this performance issue, but in these sensitive areas and all this stuff. I'm going to tell you directly to say, listen, you are bad at what you do, and you dare not even come with a race card or a gender card if you're a woman. There's the other practical advantage of having diverse things. You can say, and I'm going to lose it with that person. Do you mind talking to them? Because they can cut through that nonsense of what you're trying to say. There's also the practicality of diversity. Just don't take a chance. And you are right. I mean, like, people who are hopeless and useless and incompetent, actually, they come in different races and gender. Lastly, the thing that is worse than a sexist is quite clear to identify, you can deal with it, is a woman who uses gender as an excuse, because what she does is worse than a sexist. She is perpetuating the stereotypes, just like with race, right? If you're an incompetent black person and then you use the red card, you are just perpetuating the stereotype that the gender and your race lowers performance. So you are actually more insidious than a blatant sexist or racist. Those kind of people I cannot stand.
Ivan, I want you to crack a little bit into that, and I think it kind of goes into this question that's there, in the fact that the question is, how do you promote participation of women that are in junior position to encourage them to be more confident? The reason why I'm saying it ties that into that is you mentioned that women who use gender as an excuse, and I want you to elaborate more on that, or tell us what that looks like, because there's a side that can say, well, a lot of times, which I think Zamo and Ivan, you even mentioned, that women tend to not self-promote. Women tend to be the ones to get coffee. There's some personalities and societal upbringings that have been placed upon us that we're more likely to be like, we take a nurturing role even in the office. So yeah. I want you to elaborate more on what that means when you say women who use gender as an excuse.
Well, it was not even just about women. It's about using any demographic to hide your incompetence. Doesn't matter, as someone was saying, whether it's race, it's sexual preference and all that stuff, or is it because I'm black, or is it because I'm a woman? No, it's not. And I think there's the point that I was trying to make, that crystal clear should be called out, and it's easier to be called out from someone from the demographic. There's the point I was trying to make. Another woman is easier to call, there's one out, or just another black person is easy to call the race card to say, like, no, that's complete nonsense. you are not delivering. So that is crystal clear. And it's just people who will take a chance in terms of, because of knowing the sensitivities, they find a way to get away with low performance, right? So, and that's what I like about the practicality, as I said, of diversity. You allow these kind of things to be out. Of course, it does not mean if you are from a different gender, you cannot call it out, but it is easier to do that, right? By the way, when you're talking about, there's a financial institution where it is so empowered because it was a white male, years before, about 5 years before, who stood up and to say, in this particular division, there is going to be not just a black CEO leading one of the biggest portion of the business, but it's going to be a female CEO. And he stuck to it. And that's what happened. So I think you have the power. If you're in a powerful position, it is your duty, but then it goes back to where we started off. You have to have the belief that the women can add the value. If you don't, it's just going to be lip service, or even if you do the best R&D strategies, they will fail, because when the challenges come up, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It comes down to belief, and belief, unfortunately, we can't see it, right? We only see it with your actions. Either you believe it or not. And to be honest, there must be a lot of people in businesses who are in top positions and fundamentally they believe women should be at home. There must be. And over time, they have just been able to get away with it, right? We'll catch up with you sooner or later. But let's be honest, there must be people who think, nah, I think their genetic makeup, women do not have it. Now, can you imagine being a CEO and having that belief? Doesn't matter about your R&D strategies. It's not going to work. You have to believe that. Bingo again, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Nathan, I want to get your final thoughts, and also from you, Nzamo, as well, as we wrap up.
Yeah, I think, it's been a great conversation, by the way. I really enjoyed it. Just getting some views on the table, good debate. I think, probably I've been saying it consistently, but I think it's not that we're not starting from scratch. I think there's some really good examples of where this has played out well, and where there's been a huge progress in certain places. But I think it also, you can't kind of paint a broad brush across every organization, every workplace, because it's not the same. And so the solution will be different. But I do think there's been some incredible progress that I've witnessed personally over the last decade or so. And to your first question, are there still pockets of resistance? Absolutely. And there's a lot of work to be done there. But I think there's some very, very clear principles. And I think it has to start with your conviction, call it conviction, purpose, worldview. It has to start there. Because if it doesn't start there, it'll just be playing lip service and window dressing. And I think it's got to start with a mindset shift. And I think to Ivan's point, you can even use a commercial lens. That's also going to help you. I mean, it doesn't matter what lens it is. There'll be one that will be helpful to you. But I think it's got to start there.
Is that one, please?
For me, I haven't been Black for a very long time. The key thing I'm learning is that as a Black person, I've never wanted anyone who's my ally I don't want them to appeal to sympathy. I want them to appeal to interest and shared value. So the same I need to extend when I get to other demographics. If I don't want to be anyone's charity case and them just their charity and they're doing me a favor, the same should apply then when I look at other demographics, whether you identify as queer or you identify as a woman or you identify as a person with disability or neurodiversity. I should not appeal to sympathy. Women don't need my sympathy. What women need, though, is shared value, shared interest. And I should still not practice protective hesitation and be tougher to men and be softer to women. I should be consistent. If I'm an asshole to men, I may be an asshole to women. Just consistency and redistribute assholism consistently across both genders. So that's for me, what I'm learning more and more now is that as an ally, it doesn't mean I should do sympathy. As an ally, what it means, I should practice radical candor. I should demand the same things I demand from everyone, but at the same time, I should be consciously aware of the biases that I bring to work, of the things that micro or macro aggressions that oppress women at work, and be someone who helps either remove those things or make them better. So, but that's going to be a long chain. And then the last one for me, if I know that I have cover, some safety, that when I do fuck up, which I will, which I sometimes do, that there's grace and mercy, which currently I don't feel exist. I don't feel there's a lot of grace and mercy. There's too much justice and not enough grace and mercy. There's too much punitive justice too. There's not a lot of restorative justice. So I feel like I hope there could be more restorative justice while I'm being an ally.
You know, I have to say, Women in Marketing Africa, I don't know how we're going to be able to promote this conversation as much as possible, because this conversation, I mean, the world needs to hear what has been said. Honestly, there's a lot of room for growth. Thank you to our panelists. I cannot say thank you enough. To Ivan, to Mzamo, to Nathan, thank you so much for being candid, open, and honest, and just for really, hitting the nail on the head on how we can continue to move this conversation forward. I'm gonna throw it over to Andrea to wrap us up.
Hi, good, and thank you. I just want to reiterate my thanks. It's been a really, really interesting conversation, and yeah, really appreciate your time on this. And yes, this, as you know, this conversation is being recorded, and we'll share snippets and the full recording on our YouTube channel. Just want to kind of reiterate some of the main points that were mentioned today. So to be an ally, listen to not to validate your own thoughts, but listen to understand. The lived experience of a man will never be the same as the lived experience of a woman. So that listening to understand is really key. Self-censorship. Everyone is scared of saying anything. This is a point that Mzamo made, that sometimes people feel scared to actually say what they really feel for fear of being cancelled. Men need a safe space to actually express their feelings, and that psychological safety to be able to make mistakes and not get cancelled for it, to have that grace and mercy in being able to make mistakes. So so many other points were made, and we'll do a write-up about this conversation. Just finally, just want to say thanks again for your time and bringing your expertise, and thank you, Bolanle, for your insightful questions and for kind of guiding the conversation. We'll leave it there, and yeah, that'll be all for us. But watch out on our YouTube channels and on our LinkedIn company page for a write-up about this insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Nathan, Ivan, Mzamo. Have a good afternoon.
Nice meet you, Nathan. Cheers, Mzamo. We should talk.
Bye. Bye.
Yes. Bye.
Take care. Bye.